Good day, everyone. My name is Craig Hurst. I am the Chief Technology Officer of the Net Effect Contractor Advisors, Inc. And today I'm very pleased to be inviting two of our project managers to speak with you about the issue of, well, they're going to talk to you about 7 game-changing pro tips for construction project management. And these guys are not only technology pros when it comes to project management, but they also have very extensive backgrounds in construction as well. So I think you're going to find it very informative. Femi, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Femi is a project manager with us, as I mentioned, but he is a PMP. And he's also a Scrum Master. He's been doing that kind of work now for a long time. Additionally, he's also an architect. So, we're very happy to have Femi on board. He certainly brings some excellent experience into the subject matter that we're talking about today. Working with Femi on this is André Barsalou. Andre is part of our Quebec-based team and also a project manager, but Andre has been working with construction companies on the implementation of such applications as Buildertrend and Procore for quite some time. So I think they're going to share with you some great ideas in terms of how to improve your project management. Congratulations for attending today. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Femi and Andre. Take it away, guys.
All right. Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with the team. Once I was alerted about the opportunity to be sharing some of these pro tips, I was really excited because we had quite an opportunity. We work with a lot of companies in the construction space, as well as my own personal experience as an architect and a professional project manager. And, we're here today to discuss some of these tips with you. And regardless of where you are in terms of digital maturity, we are quite confident that we'll be offering you some value in some of these tips that you can relate to. And Andre, what do you feel about, stepping into this as a project manager, going live, discussing some of the pro tips?
I am very excited. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Femi. I'm very excited to be here with you. Just to share some of our experience. Again, just a little intro before we get into it. We mainly work in change management and digital change management, so it's more special projects and less in operations lately. But these PMP or project management, professional principles or PMBOK principles that we'll bring in, we'll be really working on bridging the gap between those principles, which are very theoretical, with the digital applications and as well with operational applications. So we'll be exploring different concepts. And, again, as Femi mentioned, depending on your, project management maturity, digital maturity, there might be some concepts you're already familiar with or even already mastered. But the conversation around bridging the gaps between these different concepts is where we'll attempt to bring some value. And of course, before we get right into it, I want to invite everybody to use the chat bar. If you have any questions, comments, we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. And of course, at the end, we'll save a few minutes for a Q&A period. So that's it. And let me take it away for our first tip.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Andre. So the first tip, basically, like we identified, is a foundational component of any project to be successful. It's basically scope management. We tagged it more like determining what you want to accomplish, why and when, which is basically about setting the intention. One of the things I've observed clearly about all projects, regardless of whatever industry you're in, is that projects don't go wrong. They typically start wrong. And the foundation of this is with scope definition. There are core concepts that we look at in terms of scope definition that actually sets the tone. One of the points of views I've had recently as far as scope management is concerned is that within our space where we get to manage some change processes, change project management processes, we look at what is to be delivered, right? We set the intention from even a point of view from proposition, what we propose to the stakeholders, or what we propose, for instance, to a client that was going to be achieved. Setting that intention basically gives us an opportunity to define clear objectives based on the milestones that is going to be achieved. And what we have on this screen basically illustrates, one of the methodologies we look at in work breakdown structure, which will actually give us, an opportunity to break down this, project into smaller work packages, right? To give the team a high level understanding of what is to be done, when it's to be done, right? And, one of this that is really applicable within the construction space in pre-construction, where you have, to map out your key milestones, your performance objectives, right? Now, in aligning this clearly, right, we look at the tone of setting priorities based on what your business wants to achieve, right? As a construction business altogether. That's why when you go into scope management, you're also going to be looking at it from a point of view of, trying to set the project based on what your values are as an organization, right? Before you move into, any commitment with any client. And that brings us to a point where we have to basically set realistic goals with the team, and takes us to the next point, which is set and manage the realistic expectations that you have. Andre, I you would have some, deeper insights into this as to speaking with schedule management, stakeholder management, because this is greatly, valuable in terms of scope management.
Absolutely, and I even want to just rewind a second as a transition from the tips 1 and 2, and focusing on that why piece. That no matter the type of project, if it's an operational project or a special project like a change management or a marketing initiative, and etc., making sure that it's aligned with business goals, be it them, higher level strategic goals. If we have the opportunity to choose the type of projects that we're working on in order to guide the company into towards the direction that we want to bring it in, those are some of the fundamentals that are really determined that first step and that first base, which is the foundation from which we build on it. No pun intended. And that's really what will allow us then to set and manage realistic expectations based on the capacity of our schedule or our calendar, as well as the stakeholder management and engagement. So stakeholders, in case you're not familiar with the concept, is essentially anybody who's involved in a given project. Could be clients, could be employees, could be subcontractors, and so on and so forth. And so this idea of capacity, and we've seen it time and time again in various projects where a given client, let's say in our case, it's for special projects or like a digital change project, we have this idea that we're going to implement a bunch of different softwares in a very restrained time frame, whereas it's unrealistic, and often this over-ambitious trying to bite off more than we can chew attitude is based again on a discrepancy that comes from a lack of planning in tip number 1. So this could look like different tools, schedule forecasting tools like Gantt charts. You can have, setting up here for future status reports so that we can, this is a concept that we'll come back to again later on, and as well establishing change management protocols so that any time we have a shift in the project timeline, it's documented and agreed upon. And a few other considerations here, could be an HR tool that has, the different stakeholder skills, certifications that our employees have, or even an org chart, an organizational chart of internal and external parties and existing personnel to kind of see, again, what capacity everybody has. And on the other end, in terms of calendar, it's keeping track of the ongoing projects, any major milestones coming up, be there financial, marketing, just organizational HR stuff, and so on and so forth. keeping all this in mind, really, again, to make sure that our objectives are realistic, are attainable, and are in line with the top priorities of the business. And a really important thing to bring in mind here as well is the idea of data. So, of course, any project, as Femi just mentioned earlier, it doesn't go bad, it starts bad. So it's all about what we give into the project. So we've all heard about, you know, garbage in and garbage out, the idea that whatever input we have in a given project is going to determine what comes out later on. So at this stage, you know, step one, it's really the what, the why, and the when. And here it's kind of, we're getting into the how and if it's actually possible. So another helpful tool that we use is a step in our project management, which is data mapping. So the idea of data or process flow mapping. So really having a visual tool that shows us what information is going where, or, you know, if it's more operational, it's who's taking care of which part of the operation, where is equipment flowing. And that way we can kind of predict where we might have issues down the line and adjust our expectations accordingly. And this then stage, or this tip, really sets things up for leadership, which is something super important and fundamental for the success of any project. We're actually just slowing down here as we just went through two of our tips. Again, I want to remind you, if there's any questions, don't hesitate. We can weave them into the presentation. And Femi,
Yeah,
tip
so
number
just
3.
as yeah,
Go
just
ahead.
before we even
Unless
move into the next tip, basically, there's you know, some certain risk we've identified basically with, you know, scope management, in the sense that one of the challenges that we experience in projects typically is scope creep. And this basically speaks to the fact that a lot of projects have a tendency to go off the rails in terms of what is meant to be achieved. And, you know, having a system in place, a clear system that documents what has been defined as the scope and revisiting it regularly gives you an opportunity for what we call the scope control. And, you know, that as André alluded to, is something that has to be reoccurring in terms of stakeholder management, collaboration, right, to ensure that the final project was initially agreed upon. So, for instance, my own personal experience is such that I've had, you know, some client interactions, even from the proposal stage, where we get to align and agree upon the documented deliverables. However, when we getting into the fulfillment of these deliverables, certain things will change. But once we come back to see that this has been documented as the agreed deliverable, then we can get into the change control process, whereby we see that, okay, certain changes need to be created, just like you have, you know, a request for change, right? We now then review the scope and, you know, document whatever changes. So basically instilling a system to formally process and manage scope changes is one of those critical steps that need to be taken to avoid, you know, risks such as budget overruns, you know, and stakeholder dissatisfaction, right? And altogether, this leads us ultimately to the next step, which is a major tip about finding and empowering your champion. Also, like André alluded to, in the sense of project leadership and governance, is basically more about clearly identifying and empowering a team leader who understands both technical and managerial aspects of the job. What comes to mind basically is my interaction with someone on a project who was also elected as a project leader from the team of the client, where, you know, he came in with a vision of what wants to be achieved, basically aligning himself with the business goals of the organization. And we also, on our end, were able to, you know, make progress and stay on budget with the client because he had all the requirements to fulfill the project on his own end. But basically, this wouldn't be possible if that particular individual wasn't empowered by the organization. So we've seen, you know, risk of macromanagement, where the owner of the organization basically wants to be on top of everything. However, we've seen that in order to improve efficiency, improve accountability, it's important to first identify who can take on a leadership role, basically to give them an ability to make critical decisions in the advancement of the project, however, as it aligns to the goals and the objectives of the organization at large, right? Now, one of the major things we've also observed, like I tried to allude to, is that ensuring that this champion, basically the leader of the project, is, in a construction perspective, visible both in the office and field teams, and has the authority to resolve issues and escalate them when needed, which brings into the note of accountability, right? In terms of, empowering and, getting your leader defined, André, I'd like to ask, what has been your experience in terms of, working on projects that has had challenges in terms of, project governance?
Absolutely. Thanks, Femi. And it's really the flow starts from tip 1 to 3. I'm sure everybody's following that. These are building blocks that kind of come in a sequence. And, if the tip 1 and 2 aren't considered before choosing that champion, well then, our objectives aren't clear. The why of these objectives that we've chosen might not be clear. The capacity of each person that's involved in the project might not be clear, and we might have expectations that are unrealistic. So I've had clients that, in our case, in digital adoption or digital change management, so that process of analyzing companies' needs and pain points, and choosing a software that would help them in their business process. So, be that a pre-con software, project management software, a CRM, or anything of that nature, putting that in that project being put into the hands of somebody who maybe doesn't have the authority or the know-how to properly guide that process to fruition, or at least part of the process. And so that's one thing that's important in this step is, that team leader or that champion could be somebody who's internal, somebody who's external. And it's important to have at least one person that has this champion role as internal, but knowing what limitations that person has and making sure that that person has the support they need. Again, be it, obviously, I'm preaching, kind of tooting our own horn here in the sense that that's something that we've done in projects, but it's really something that helps ensure that the projects are successful. And the same might be the case. I'm sure you have, positive examples, Femi, but the same might be the case just operationally. Putting the responsibility of a given project on the shoulders of somebody who might not be ready or isn't supported yet or hasn't gotten the right certification or experience could really put in peril a given project, a given operational project, and then ruin a relationship with the client and also then word of mouth is affected and so on and so forth. But not always negative examples that prove the case. Femi, I'm sure that you have an example of something that went well in terms of selecting champions.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to take an example of an implementation project that we worked on with a client, a mechanical contractor, basically, and we realized we were able to identify that the owner of this organization had a challenge of time constraints, and we looked at the time frame that we're looking to have this software implemented, and we made the recommendation to basically select a digital champion, or basically we call this a project leader. And this project leader was clearly defined with the capability and the capacity that was available with the team. We were able to select someone that was going to be our point of communication, our point of contact, and also was well aware of the pain points and how to mitigate this, risk in terms of the implementation process. And, having that person to touch base with to basically champion the cause of the successful implementation, was able to delegate some of these challenges that the owner of the organization would have had if he had to go by himself to oversee the implementation of this project. So that's just one of the examples we've had in terms of, empowering your champion. And, in terms of empowering the champion, we were able to see one key area that we've identified as a pro tip as well, in the sense of integrating technology. Just like I mentioned, I try to, allude to the fact that in an implementation process, for instance, in terms of technology implementation, we saw that this project leader needed to be on track with the update, needed to be on track with, schedule adjustments based on what we're trying to get done. And we resolved to seeing how some of these tasks could be delegated adequately with help of technology. And one of those aspects we look at in this tip here is the concept of automations. I don't know the level of—
Sorry, I was just gonna interrupt for one moment. We had a little question for the previous tip. So just circle back so we'll get right back to the concept of automation. Thank you, Mark, for your question. 2 leaders, that's not exactly, wouldn't be ideal. I mean, it's if there were 2 leaders involved, the responsibilities of each would have to be really clearly defined. Ideally, it would be 1 champion, ideally internally, so that way anybody who's involved in the project is already a relationship with that person, or if it's an external party, really to make it clear to any other stakeholder that's involved that this person is leading the show. In terms of having a support that's both internal and external, it's really determining that if you have a champion internally, that person is supported, let's say, by an external champion who's kind of just helping this person maybe in the background keep the project on the rails. An example of which is Femi and I, project managers who work usually with one specific contact in the in-house, so that we can help them guide the project along. And again, that really depends on each person's skill set and the nature of the project, but ideally 1 person has that hat of being the champion. Anything else to add, Femi, on that?
Yeah, so another thing to add to that basically is that it depends on the particular scenario we're looking at, but in most cases we're seeing that having a 1 project leader is going to be helpful. But for instance, looking at a project we just worked on, we had a scenario where we had 2 project leaders, right? Ideally, 1 was on the field and 1 was in the office. However, the 1 on the field was able to stay in collaboration and constant communication with the 1 in the office. And also the 1 in the office had an experience on field. So there was a sense of relatability to what was prevalent on the field. So whatever the case scenario is, identifying project leaders, either a person or 2 persons, what's most important now is that you are basically identifying someone who can actually maintain an oversight from a project management office point of view, right? So someone on the field that has an experience with office as well as admin stuff in the office can be the best suit. However, if you're looking at a case where someone in the office and someone on the field can communicate consistently based on the tools available to them, that would also be an ideal case scenario, because one of the major overarching issues in terms of project is communication, right? So however well your communication is, or the tools that are available to you are, you can have both in the office and also on the side. So that's one of the things where we actually are leading to the next point of integrating technology, right? One of the major aspects we are looking at here in terms of integrating technology to start with is in terms of workflow automation. One of the identified challenges that we've seen is having redundancy in terms of certain actions being done in the office, as well as a lack of understanding on what's being done on the site, right? So, setting up yourself for success by, the use of technology in setting, some of these workflows in order, right? Establishing a workflow and seeing how you can automate it to reduce, redundant manual efforts, basically improves efficiency at large. However, if you don't have your workflows clearly mapped out, like we go through a process of understanding what is being done from each stage to the next stage, you will not be able to clearly identify certain things that you can automate with the help of the applications you're using. So for instance, you could be using a project management information system, right? Like a project management software, so to speak. And there are certain things you have to be doing every time, like setting up your reminders, setting up deadlines and all that. But you can see that there is a process to which you still come back to, and it's taking up some time, you can actually set up an automation to get this done. So one of the things we basically would just say as a pro tip is look for opportunities to automate your workflows, however much you can. That would be great. But what's most important to start with is understanding the workflows and seeing opportunities to implement some automation, right? And that will basically, empower your people with, real-time updates on the field, the communication quality between the field and the office, right? All of this basically can be done wonderfully well with the integration of technology, where I feel, we're at different levels of digital maturity. However, we have an opportunity at whatever level we are to implement some of these automations. So, Andre, I think we were in a conversation where we mentioned that even just setting up a reminder, right, to setting deadlines done in the office and having that communicated to the field as a pop-up reminder in the email, it's a game changer. It might seem a little, but that's kind of like one of the great starting points to automating certain things. How you get your calendars populated, how you get, schedule managed and, in real time updated, so everyone is notified about the schedule change, right? All of those things, improve the overall efficiency of your operations, generally speaking. And also speaking about that, there are several tools in the marketplace that enable all of this to take place. And, one of the things we're looking at here on this particular point, as indicated with one of the symbols here, is the BIM, which is the Building Information Modeling, which also ties into real-time collaboration and coordination. I don't know how many of us here are familiar with Building Information Modeling, but it's been in operation. Well, my experience as an architect, I remember working on a lot of projects where we had to collaborate with engineers, specialty contractors. But one of the beautiful things is that we are working on live designs, in the sense that whatever changes were being made, everyone is getting it at the same time. And if you're not quite familiar with the Building Information Modeling system, I'm just going to give you a very simple illustration of how this works. If you're also familiar with the Google Docs system, the Google Workspace, where everyone has access to updated information and two people can be working on the same document at a time, and we're all getting updated with the changes, right? So there is no miscommunication of what needs to be changed or what is the most recent version that we're going to be working on, right? And that's one of those areas we're looking at in terms of integrating technology to how we work. What's most fundamental, however complex the term of BIM seems to be, is establishing real-time collaboration and coordination between teams, either the field team or the office team. You can have that done on different levels. So, Andre, I think you probably would want to maybe state another, real life case scenario of what integrating technology looks like.
I want to also take the opportunity to take a step back into the consideration of different people, different organizations, and their digital maturity. And this point really illustrates the importance again of the three first tips that we were exploring, in the sense of it all depends on what your needs are and what your priorities are. You can even if you're still pen and paper, if you're still Excel based, this point 4, integrating technology, might look like utilizing a Google Calendar or an Outlook calendar, just to have the key milestones of a given project set up, and alerts coming through, delegations in terms of who's attending that particular event in your calendar. And that goes all the way to project management, to BIM, to even AI tools that could be integrated. But we don't need to go that far if we're not ready for it. It's again always circling back to especially the tips 1 and 2, whereas making sure that this tip, integrating technology, is answering specifically those first 2 tips, but also supporting our champion that we've chosen in step number 3. And this is another example of, and I might seem a little negative, but I think we all learn from mistakes, but this has been the case with different clients as well, trying to jump steps in digital maturity and thinking that with one project of change management, we're going to settle all of our issues and integrate AI and everything's going to be automated and everything's going to be amazing. Whereas we want to try to do that within a year. But, really our need is just to have better estimation and budget tracking from, really the core business portions of what the pain points are. So that's some things to really keep in mind at this point. And I think that, again, it depends as well on data. So we mentioned data before, we mentioned garbage in and garbage out. This is really important of a step also to get support in the technology portion. If in step number 2, in the tip number 2, we determine that the digital maturity of the people involved internally isn't high enough to make those decisions. Of course, it might seem like just a plug, but the net effect, obviously, we assist clients in that respect. And it brings us to tip number 5, which is all about data reporting and checking in with the project to make sure that everything is flowing smoothly. And that brings to the table a concept that I'd love for you to elaborate on, Femi, a PMP concept, which is earned value management.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the whole concept of earned value management, EVM, is tied to the monitoring and controlling process of any project, right? Any project you start, you want to be able to measure the performance, the project performance in terms of operations, in terms of the financial health of the project as well. Basically, also have an opportunity to, compare the performance against the project baseline, giving you insight into whether the project is on track in terms of cost and time. Right now, one of the key components we've looked at, or we're looking at in this particular tip as the raw material for you to be able to work with. The images on the screen alludes to a dashboard, right? But the dashboard is not going to build itself. It's going to be built on data, right? And one of the things I typically like to quote here is that data is like the new oil in construction. We can call it like gold. And why I use that terminology basically is to express that on its own, it's raw, it's unrefined, but when structured and used effectively, it becomes, the lifeblood that powers smarter decisions, project efficiencies, and competitive advantage at large. Hence, we are looking at a scenario whereby you're seeing the progress of the project and you're comparing that against the project objectives. However, this is done because of the quality of information that you have about the project, and that's where data comes into play. And how do we get this data to work with? Right, you have it. As raw and unrefined as it may be, you need to then structure it. Now, that brings us into, a sub-pro tip as to earned value management in terms of creating centralized data repositories, right? You need to understand that having a single source of truth by integrating all project-related data like design, schedules, budgets, contracts, into a uniform platform, like a project management information system, like I mentioned earlier. This basically improves accuracy and reduces risk of errors. Like you're having a place where you know that it basically is containing all the necessary information you need across board regarding the project lifecycle. Now, the next step, aside from structuring the data, having a central point of it, is to classify the data, right? And there are several tools out there in terms of, organizing the information that comes in from the field, as well as, information in the office, to be able to enable real-time insights and, get you to make faster decisions, just like, how you have certain tools being able to integrate with each other, basically giving you an opportunity to have a communication, basically centralizing your data system to give you an opportunity to achieve more accuracy and reduce errors. Now, that also feeds into facilitating data exchange, like I mentioned, integrating certain tools. Right now in the construction space, we've looked at a lot of situations with a lot of GCs, as well as some other specialty subtrades, where they're looking at an opportunity to identify the project health, like finance management, to see where the project is, comparing what has been estimated with what is actual. And this is where data comes into play. And how does this data come into play? It's by having to set up a system that gives you access to data from different platforms that you could be on. For instance, you're going to be on QuickBooks and you're working on a different platform that you probably are more in tune with, like a project management platform where your site superintendents are usually on to see how the projects are going. However, you can create a system in terms of data structuring to give a feed into operability from the QuickBooks platform to the project management platform to give the project managers an understanding of the health of the project from a high level point of view, just as it infers from the dashboard point of view, right? And all this basically ties into what we see data structuring to provide for any organization, which is basically eliminating confusion and ensuring that all stakeholders are working with accurate and up-to-date information. Right, that's the beauty, and that's one of the things we look at. Even moving ahead, as far as earned value management is concerned, you're going to be taking advantage of predictive analytics with the help of technology, but being able to centralize your data gives you the opportunity to have predictive analytics of what could possibly go wrong with other projects similar to what you've experienced in the past. So having a good data structure gives you opportunities to, forecast and, get to deal with risk before they appear, right? And, this is one of the major aspects where, technology comes into play as a source of truth to basically align you for efficiency moving forward as you grow as an organization and also as you get to do your project successfully. All right. So in terms of, this data structuring altogether, Andre, what has been like your experience in terms of working with a client that has identified that data is quite valuable? Have you had an experience where that realization brought certain need for changes that you were able to oversee, and how did that process go?
Well, quite well. I mean, one of the most simple, and basic concepts of data is, making sure your cost codes are in order, making sure your price lists are up to date, and making sure that your different estimating templates are well done so that the budgets are easy to track within your project management piece. And also, as you said, moving forward, once you have historical data on a certain amount of projects, then you can really use that to then feed back up to the initialization of a new project. So again, these are always cycles, right? All these tips kind of feed into each other, and this data portion then feeds back into analysis of the what, when, and why, and then moving forward. So I've seen, again, clients who just by basically resetting or reviewing their cost sheets or their estimates have that capacity to analyze and make decisions that are more aligned with their business priorities.
Absolutely, awesome. That's about it for data structuring. We'll move into communication management. I think I mentioned earlier that the whole concept of communication management within project management, as it were, is, let's say, about 75 to 80% of what brings to bear a successful project. From the beginning to the end, it all starts with clear and concise communication. However, one of these things we like to look at is the establishing of structured communication channels that connect you with the office. But, looking at it from a point of view of, CRM you might know as, client relationship management, we like to refer to that as stakeholder management. Stakeholder management in the sense that whoever is involved with the project is a stakeholder. And one of the ways to go about this is clearly establishing a structured communication channel. We've had situations where you have conversation on projects regarding certain issues not documented, right? There are opportunities with the help of technology to create a platform where every conversation related to a particular project can be recorded and can be kept to be referred to. However, this all starts by clearly identifying where these channels are going to be and how the access to conversations on projects can be controlled. So creating a structured communication channel and also having some form of governance in terms of access control to these communication channels is one of the major aspects we look at in terms of communication management that actually improves interaction and collaboration on projects. Now,
Absolutely.
in terms
And
of
one
this,
of the
yeah.
sorry. One of the pitfalls, I was just going to add to that, one of the pitfalls that we've seen often is because communication seems just like an obvious piece that it's often disregarded in terms of a step in proper project management in terms of setting up what the structure will look like. So, you know, it might then look like really disorganized communication that's going through text messages, calls here and mail there, and then information gets lost. And just because we didn't take the time to say, okay, we're going to use Slack, for example, which has different channels that you can then assign to a given project, and then, you know, if make a decision and communicate it clearly to the rest of the team that we're going to be communicating through this channel. That way nothing is missed. That way you can flag things if ever an information was shared that was wrong, or you know, anything else that needs to be communicated for a given project. Go ahead, Femi. You were going to say?
Oh yeah. So what I was basically going to allude to is practically most of what you've been able to cover in terms of establishing those channels. But this is a very broad topic, and I think if we're going to go into the details of it, we'll probably not have enough time to do so. But one of the things we've seen in terms of, you know, working on digital transformation projects with clients in the construction space as well is that, you know, you want to be able to have access to, you know, future references on past projects, and having clearly defined communication channels gives you a platform to be able to track back. Because, you know, personally, I've, you know, had conversations where, you know, you've established certain things and, you know, it's been contested at some point. Having those channels like historic records of conversations and chats, having a platform that actually keeps all of this is a great tool to promote transparency, right? Where you have certain confusions regarding certain, you know, requests made, you can have a point of reference. And this basically is a system like the CRM system is something that can be embedded in the organization to cut across different platforms. So for instance, where you're working with, you know, sending emails or sending texts regarding certain projects, there are tools even embedded within the CRM tools that can actually select some keywords to align these conversations with the project in question, right? So all of this is still going to be accessible, right, for future references. So it's a major point that we feel you can actually start from, you know, the lowest hanging fruit of first identifying what is going to be your communication channel and creating a standard procedure to make sure that this is followed through, right? In establishing that, you have, you know, some workflow processes in terms of seeing what is being done on those communication platforms to see what could be automated so that you don't have to repopulate or re-impute the same information you're trying to communicate across teams regarding projects. So you just have a single source of truth regarding communication on project matters, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, just before we open up for some questions, we were focusing really on PMP and PBOK principles. And we just wanted to give a little curveball for our seventh tip here, which is anchored in agile methodologies. So really more of a, you know, IT and development framework, but also that can apply to any type of project. So Femi, just in a couple of minutes, and it's really a great segue from the communication piece, because that's really what it's all about. It's about communicating with the team and resetting, making sure everybody's on the same page, essentially.
Yeah, the concept of, you know, the agile methodology is taking into consideration of a fast-paced environment, which construction operational environment is. You're making decisions quickly and you're observing bottlenecks, and you need to make a resolution on them. Now, this concept basically gives you an opportunity to huddle back, to recenter on what the objectives are. Now, we look at opportunities like having weekly stand-up meetings. What we call stand-up meetings basically is like a huddle where you quickly identify the bottlenecks or bring into the conversations bottlenecks like what probably would be going wrong on site if not quickly attended to, and reassign resources where needed. Now, this is something that is essential to help, refocus on what is important in alignment with the objective of the project, right? And this is an opportunity where teams can get to resolve on the next critical task or milestones and get to break them down into more manageable steps. Now, in our own personal experience with, some of these projects that we've handled in terms of specialty projects, we've seen that it is most important to have an opportunity to touch base with all stakeholders, as it were, even before identifying some of these bottlenecks, because in meeting and discussing the objectives, you actually get to identify some of these issues before they even arise, right? So having this kind of like set up as an operative system in place helps any project to stay on track. That's just, one of the major things we are looking at from an agile point of view. And like agile alludes to is, pivoting quickly, making readjustment quickly, just so that we are staying on time and within, budget, and ultimately bringing to bear the quality that has been envisioned from the very start, where you've actually defined the scope and the objective. And this gives you an opportunity at different stages of the project to maintain alignment with that objective. So, the real concept here is to empower your teams to identify, independently and also as a team, to see what the issues are that are arising, to see what the issues are that might arise, and give an opportunity for voices to be heard to make resolutions on these things as soon as possible.
Well said, Femi. Let's take a few minutes here to open it up to any questions. So you can use the chat bar. Si vous préférez poser les questions en français, il n'y a pas de problème. And we'll just keep an eye on that as we wrap up. So we're getting right into actual software. Well, I'll take a hack at it, a try. This one is tough. We were probably expecting somebody to have a specific IT question. I mean, it really depends on the pain points. This is why it's part of why we did this presentation today. That's actually something that we go through. We never really give any of those kind of answers before having a conversation, determining what the clients need. So that might seem a little silly to say, but we do have a few softwares that we gravitate to because they have the functionality that we look for. But that really depends on the needs, the structure of the company, how many people. Multi-million-dollar project is a good piece of information, but that's we'd have to do more digging before actually giving that kind of recommendation. I don't know, Femi, if you have had a software off the top of your head, but generally speaking, that's something that we kind of advice that we bring in once we know more about the project.
Yeah, so that's really where it is, because if I were to go based upon this question alone and give an answer to it, yes, you might have something to look out for. However, we have not taken a holistic point of view as to what the actual, needs requirement in terms of functional capabilities you're going to be looking at, right? And, possibilities for, integration that you would require. So what we do basically with our clients is to give us an opportunity to see where we can, mitigate some risk that might be involved. However, the fact is that we can make recommendations, but we're looking ahead as well of our recommendations to see that it's sustainable as far as scalability is concerned. But for a HVAC contractor managing, this size of projects, I think for a sales environment, I don't know if you've checked out, Salesforce Field Service, right? That might be something you want to take a quick look at. But one of the things we've noticed is even if you find out what software you're meant to go for, there are certain things that come into play as far as scaling is concerned that might not make it a favorable fit for you. So we walk with you through that process to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's dotted to make sure that you are onboarding something that is favorable to scale.
And Marc-André, feel free to reach out to us. We would be our pleasure to have a conversation to follow up. But yeah, of course, we're naturally following our own tips by inviting you to have a bit of a deeper conversation on that point. Thank you, Femi. We have another question here from Ari. As project managers, what would you say is the best way to deal with uncooperative stakeholders? That's a really good question. I'm gonna let you take the first jab at that.
Okay, so it's interesting that you say uncooperative. Uncooperative might come in different aspects, right? You might define a stakeholder being uncooperative from a different point of view. However, what is the first step I would take is to align our objectives, right? Because someone or our stakeholder would seem uncooperative if your objectives are not really aligned. What do you want to achieve in this project should be aligned with what I want to achieve in this project. If you want progress, that I want progress, we then can see how we can make a resolution to find the best possible way to make progress, right? But I feel the foundation of setting, the intention for making progress is one of the first steps I would personally take in dealing with an uncooperative stakeholder, just to check in with the fact that the progress that we are trying to get to is what we are both looking at, and we just need to devise a way to get there, right? So, setting that up leaves us also an opportunity to establish clear communication channels, because some of this could also be attributed to poor communication, right? Having updates on certain things that are being done in the direction of progress of the project should be communicated in a timely fashion that also should be documented, right? So all of this basically for me, I'll say starts from identifying what the real objectives are to make sure that both parties are aligned, all parties are aligned with these objectives. Then we can now set up actionable steps to achieve it together.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer. And I was just going to say number one, it depends on who the stakeholder is and what their part in the project is, but it's circling back to what the objectives are and how that concerns a particular stakeholder. If it's an employee, reminding them, let's say, if the project is a digital adoption, it's reminding them how this digital adoption is going to help them in their work. For example, reminding them of the agreement that was had, if it's an external stakeholder or a client that's involved, and utilizing a tool like a huddle, like the last tip, to kind of have that conversation and remind each other of the why of the whole project. I think that would be another way of bringing somebody back into the fold. And
absolutely.
Fantastic. I think on that note, we shall bring it to a close unless there's anything else. I want to thank everybody for joining in. Thank you, Femi, for sharing all that wisdom. And of course, as if you missed it in the chat, this the recording will be shared, and we're here to answer any other questions if you want. We have our contact information available here on the screen, and we hope that we'll be in touch. Femi, any closing thoughts?
Oh yeah, so basically I'm really appreciative of the fact that we've had your audience so far in this session. We know that 1 hour might not be enough to cover all the pro tips that possibly exist as far as project management and construction management is concerned. However, we are with a team of experts in this field where we get to walk you through that process. Once you can reach out to us, we will get to discover where the pain points are and make some in-depth recommendations as to how to alleviate them. Altogether, this has been excellent. Thank you so much, André, for tag teaming with me on this.
My pleasure. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and stay tuned for our next webinar.
Awesome.